Most people don't realize how much the border between America and Canada shapes daily life. It's just a line on a map, yet the connections across it run deeper than most imagine. Did you know that in several U.S. states, ties with Canada are more than neighborly, they're essential, sometimes even more influential than those with the rest of the country? Picture a quiet street in Burlington, Vermont, row houses, church steeples, and conversations in French drifting from cafes. Here, national identity can feel negotiable. This video unpacks the real story behind 10 American states where the idea of breaking away and joining Canada has moved from distant rumor to practical possibility. Each point is backed by discussions on forums, first-hand accounts, news coverage, and government reports. It's not speculation, but hard evidence. And the details rarely get discussed openly. You're about to see how the facts shift the picture. But before we continue, make sure to subscribe. Number 10. Vermont loyalty. Vermont stands apart from familiar images of America's fast pace and big ambitions. Its forests, villages, and steady pace evoke an older world. Americans are used to thinking of Vermont as a peaceful outlier, but many forget it was a self-governing republic from 1777 to 1791, issuing its own currency, running its own courts, and setting its own rules before joining the Union. The tradition of independence never faded. Today, Vermont's economy is deeply linked to Quebec. Quebecois tourists fill ski lodges every winter, and bilingual signs greet drivers near the border. Social policies, government health programs, environmental protections, progressive labor rights often line up more closely with Canada than with states farther south. There is even a secessionist group, the Second Vermont Republic, whose members advocate for either full independence or closer ties to Canada. Most Americans are surprised to learn this isn't just a fringe protest. Vermont exports nearly $500 million of goods to Canada each year. In places like Darby Line, residents cross to Quebec for groceries or dental appointments as easily as walking downtown. It can feel unfamiliar to visitors who expect sharper boundaries. If there were ever a major crisis, economic, political, or environmental, these deep connections might feel like a pressure release valve, not a curiosity. Maybe you've noticed this yourself. Have you ever crossed a border in New England and felt like you entered a different world? Number 9. Maine reliance. The lights of Maine often depend on a Canadian power grid. Throughout the long, icy winters, Quebec's electricity heats thousands of homes. Should the supply from Quebec stop, officials estimate that large sections of Maine would face blackouts, with no affordable alternative. Trade between Maine and Canada exceeds $3 billion annually. Trucks carry lumber, seafood, and manufactured goods north and south every hour. Small towns on both sides host joint festivals, and the lines at the border sometimes move faster than those at a city supermarket. The fishing docks of Eastport look almost identical to those in Nova Scotia. French remains a living language in many villages, and families often have relatives across the St. Croix River. Politically, Maine shares Canada's reputation for community-based problem-solving and pragmatic politics. The state's identity is marked more by stubborn survival through harsh winters than by attachment to Washington's headlines. Notably, Maine itself separated from Massachusetts in 1820, showing a history of rethinking political ties. For many Mainers, the distinction between Canadian and American feels less important than holding on to work, warmth, and community ties. Number 8. New Hampshire grit. The motto, "Live free or die," rings out on license plates and courthouse stones across New Hampshire. Politically and culturally, the state prefers limited government and maximum self-reliance. It stands alone in collecting neither sales nor income tax. Americans visiting New Hampshire might find town meetings more heated and decentralized than in any southern state. But beneath this independent streak, ties to Canada are robust. Annual cross-border trade is valued at over $8 billion. The presence of large Canadian firms in towns like Manchester reveals an integration that's practical, not just symbolic. Canadian shoppers flock to tax-free outlets, and snowmobile trails tie northern counties to Quebecois outposts. In 2022, lawmakers proposed a constitutional amendment that would have allowed voters to discuss secession, a proposal that reached the state house floor. The effort failed, but the conversation marked a shift. The Free State Project, which recruits libertarians to settle in New Hampshire, has grown past 5,000 members, working toward local governance with minimal federal influence, a philosophy that overlaps with Canada's decentralized system. Canadians value provincial autonomy, and so do many in New Hampshire. It's a small detail, but one worth asking. Which U.S. border town gave you the strongest sense of crossing into a new culture? Number 7. Minnesota blending. Minnesota shares over 550 miles of international border with Canada. Each year, Goods worth billions cross at places like Grand Portage and International Falls. Hockey rinks fill on winter evenings, and lakes glow during summer. Cultural habits like ice fishing shacks and midwinter festivals mirror those in neighboring Manitoba and Ontario. Decades ago, fur was traded from Minnesota's forests through Hudson Bay Company outposts. Today, dual Canadian-American citizenship is not uncommon, supported by family ties and business cooperatives. Political values are often progressive, focusing on strong local healthcare programs, public education, and environmental initiatives, all qualities commonly associated with Canada's provinces. In years of national instability, Minnesota's leaders have explored more regional agreements, sometimes bypassing Washington. On the street level, when blizzards shut down highways, snowplows from the Canadian side have crossed over to help. These relationships aren't just symbolic, they're practical support. Number 6. North Dakota Pipeline. North Dakota's history doesn't grab headlines, but its economy threads north through pipelines, goods, and families. Each year, the state exports billions of dollars in energy products, grain, and manufactured parts to Canada. Canadian electricity powers cities like Grand Forks and keeps rural towns running when blizzards shut down local grids. Joint agricultural efforts mean that wheat and barley can cross the border several times before ending up in homes or breweries. It's common for families living along the border to shop, work, or receive medical care in Manitoba or Saskatchewan. During oil booms, job postings run in both directions. North Dakota's voters often favor smaller government, lower taxes, and individual responsibility, sometimes reflecting the conservative approach seen in Western Canadian provinces like Alberta. In the early 1980s, discussions about merging elements of North Dakota's and Manitoba's economies weren't taken seriously in Washington, but they never entirely disappeared among business leaders. The ties have only grown stronger since then. Number 5. Montana Kinship. Montana lines up against Alberta, British Columbia, and Saskatchewan, and its sense of self is shaped by these northern neighbors. Each year, cross-border traffic includes tens of thousands of cattle, crates of wheat, and exports of minerals. Lumber mills on both sides share machinery and expertise. On the ground, the border sometimes feels like a rural highway, more than a line between nations. Ranchers wave to each other from pickup trucks in places where cell phone signals drop out. In winter, storms hit Montana and southern Alberta the same night. Annual trade between Montana and Canadian provinces approaches $1.7 billion. Deep connections date back to the days when Canadian fur traders moved freely throughout the state. Today, partnerships in environmental management, wildfire response, and rural healthcare are routine. Politically, many Montanans complain of federal neglect and align with a more local, pragmatic government structure. It's not just talk. Formal votes occasionally consider state-level responses to Ottawa as much as to D.C. After a tough season, a Montanan might wonder whether things would run better under a government more focused on the land than on the headlines coming from distant cities. Number 4. Washington integration. Some think of Seattle as a tech powerhouse, far removed from rural territory. But Washington's economy and political climate are tightly linked to Canada. Every year, more than $20 billion crosses the border in both directions. Ports in Seattle and Vancouver coordinate ocean freight routes, and a new high-speed rail is being discussed to shorten the current 3-hour drive. The region's hydroelectric grid supplies power for millions. Electricity from British Columbia flows south to light businesses and homes. In city parks, one can find environmental protests and coffee shops that echo movements in Vancouver. Policies on climate, healthcare, and workers' rights closely align with those of British Columbia. Residents in the Puget Sound region vacation in Victoria, British Columbia, as often as in Oregon. When policymakers debate environmental regulations, they often cite Canadian models. The border isn't just a crossing, it's part of the area's day-to-day rhythm. Number 3. Oregon drift. Oregon's independence is often summed up in its individuality. But lately, the state's identity crisis is marked by a split. Some rural counties push to realign with Idaho, while others look north to Canada. Over $4 billion worth of trade crosses between Oregon and Canada every year. Environmentalists point to shared forests and salmon fisheries as evidence that policy should turn north for partnerships. Portland and Vancouver have similar rates of transit usage, and both cities have thriving arts districts supported by public grants. Universal healthcare in British Columbia is often mentioned approvingly by Oregon policy advocates. Labor agreements between West Coast ports shape the work schedules for both states and provinces. As internal divisions grow over state and federal policy, some Oregonians see Canada's steadier politics as a model worth considering. One contradiction stands out here. While many in rural counties see their future with Idaho for cultural reasons, their economic ties with Canada often prove just as vital for survival. By now, you might be comparing it to your own life. When did you first notice a state or town politically drifting from the nation's mainstream? Number 2. Alaska Divide. Alaska sits apart, connected to the continental U.S. only via roadways through Canada. Its closest commercial hubs are in British Columbia and Yukon, not Washington or Oregon. Alaska's economy is built on oil, seafood, and timber, industries in which Canadian firms are major investors. In 2022, Canada was Alaska's second-largest trading partner, accounting for nearly $500 million in exported goods. Alaska's largest fishing fleets rely on Canadian ports for repairs and supplies. Critical power and telecom lines cross back and forth, and the region's security is managed jointly. Alaska and Canada share air defense duties under NORAD, a unique binational alliance. Past ownership, Alaska was Russian until 1867, stands as a reminder that borders and alliances aren't forever. Culturally, Alaskans are used to the same isolation, resilience, and cooperation that mark life in Canada's far north. Visits between Whitehorse and Anchorage often feel more like crossing between sister cities than foreign capitals. Many here describe feeling disconnected from the national debate, a contradiction that leads some to wonder out loud whether another shift in allegiance could ever happen. Number 1. Michigan Lifeline. Michigan may surprise those who picture the U.S.-Canada border as a quiet rural backwater. The facts here are inescapable. Every year, approximately $80 billion in goods, cars, auto parts, steel, passes over the Ambassador Bridge or through the Detroit-Windsor Tunnel. In practical terms, more than 7,000 trucks cross the border into Canada every single day. Detroit's auto industry is deeply intertwined with Ontario's. A single engine or chassis may cross the border 6 times before assembly. Michigan also imports significant electricity from Ontario's power plants to help meet peak demand. Pipelines carry natural gas and oil in both directions. Historically, after the Toledo War in the early 1830s, Michigan's leaders discussed shifting their allegiance to Canada, an early sign of pragmatic thinking that's echoed today in business partnerships and family ties. In fact, the region's integration goes so far that even daily commutes can cross national lines. Nurses, auto workers, and teachers frequently live on one side of the border and work on the other. This is where the contradictions sharpen. Michigan relies on its integration with Canada for economic survival, even as state politics sometimes push toward greater American exceptionalism. It can feel like living in 2 places at once, part of the Midwest, yet always pulled northward. Think about your own experience for a moment. Have you ever driven across the Detroit-Windsor border and felt the change instantly? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this.